Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well known and respected personal branding expert and a storyteller from Lagos, Nigeria, Nora Agbakhamen. Nora, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Nora is a social impact storyteller and a personal brand strategist. Her signature work is 7-Day Personal Branding Challenge. So, Nora, what early experiences or influences first drew you to the world of storytelling and social impact?
That's a fantastic question, Ashutosh. Honestly, I think storytelling found me long before I knew what the term was, because I was born into a family of storytellers.
Mhm.
My dad was a master storyteller. So I remember both parents, they had different methods of correcting us when we go wrong. My
Mhm.
mom was very direct and she was an instant disciplinarian. My dad, on the other hand, was more strategic about correction.
Mhm.
So you do something wrong, he would tell you a story that you would never forget.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so I remember one particular occasion when I did something wrong and told a lie. And I denied it so badly that I started to cry.
Mhm.
Of course, my parents knew I was lying. So my dad, in his usual way, said, okay, let her be,
Mhm.
let her be. So I go off thinking that I've escaped the lie. And then as I'm about to sleep, my dad calls me and says, Nora, get your Bible. I bring my Bible because we are Christians, and he asked me to open a place in the Bible and read it out loud. It was a story of a couple who told a lie and suffered tragic consequences as a result.
Mhm.
And as I finish reading, he looks me dead in the eye. He doesn't say anything, he looks me dead in the eye. And
Mhm.
before long, I started confessing everything. I
Mhm.
said everything as it happened.
Yeah,
So when I look back at that incident, I realized that it was a story that made me, that got to my heart and made me a better person. So
amazing.
I grew up telling stories. It eventually became second
Fascinating.
nature, and that's how we
Fascinating.
all tell stories.
Nora, what have been some defining turning points in your 12-year journey that shaped your voice and purpose?
For me, it has to be the time I did a training for the Nigerian Conservation Foundation.
Mhm.
So the NCF is Nigeria's foremost conservation agency in Nigeria. And I was tasked to do a 2 day training for them. Previously, I had trained them on other things, but this time the project was an ongoing project in a pastoral community.
Mhm.
So the team in the field were churning out data, they were sending reports, they were sending challenges, and the team at home were tasked to make sense out of that data
Mhm.
so that all the stakeholders can be connected. So it was a beautiful moment to make stories out of them. It was hands-on. And then suddenly everybody started making meaning from that very intimidating data. It was an instant transformation, instant storytelling. And at the end of that training, the DG comes to me and says, Nora, I've not seen anything like this.
Mhm.
The impact was instant.
Mm.
So that was a very proud moment for
I'm
me
sure.
and a
I'm
very
sure.
grounding one. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure. You were also
Yeah.
named as the number one storyteller in Nigeria by Favicon. How
Yes.
did that moment change the way you see your work and your influence?
That's another fantastic question. You see, when I started showing up on LinkedIn, I wasn't thinking about recognition. I was just sharing my little everyday experiences and telling stories that my audience could relate to.
Hmm.
Because as an introvert, honestly, putting myself out there on LinkedIn was one of the hardest things I've
Mhm.
done. But when I had conversations with other introverts, I realized that all of us were just waiting for someone to motivate us. So I started by sharing my stories, by sharing my lived experiences and the lessons I was learning. So when I saw my name on that Favicon list at the very top in Nigeria, it just made me realize that people were paying attention and seeing what I was doing. And so I was genuinely happy, but also it also made me more responsible because I knew people were watching me, waiting to be inspired and waiting to put themselves out there.
Well said. You describe yourself as a social impact storyteller. How do you define social impact? And what makes storytelling an engine for social change?
Beautiful question, Ashutosh. In fact, you just reminded me of a question my daughter asked me some weeks ago. And she said, Mommy, what do you mean by you are a social impact storyteller? And I tell her, Mommy uses stories to explain how people's actions or their lack of actions affect other people and the environment so that we can do better and make our world safer. And I think, honestly, that's the simplest way to put it. So for me, social impact storytelling is about using narratives to intentionally show the human side of things. So issues like climate change, education, conservation, and all of that, you use storytelling to make them come alive so that people can be inspired to take action and make both people and the environment, people and the planet a better place. So yes, so for me that's and then as an engine of social change, if you want to really move people to action, you've got to use stories. You've got to use real human experiences. So while data is important, when you lead with stories, make people take action. Let me give you an example. So for instance, instead of saying this community lost 40% of their crops to drought, I would lead with a story. I'd tell you the story of Gambo, a lady in a drought-stricken community who wakes up early to go fetch water to water her crops. And this last-ditch attempt may not yield anything. I'll tell you the story of a 10-year-old son who is out of school because their means of livelihood is affected. And then I'll ease into the data and then tell you something like Gambo is one of 200 women in this community whose crops were destroyed by the drought, something like that. That way the data comes alive and people go from awareness to empathy and then from empathy to action.
How can storytellers balance authenticity with advocacy, especially when representing marginalized voices?
Well, when it comes to authenticity and advocacy, I think it all boils down to respect. For me, it starts with listening. You cannot tell someone's story if you have not truly listened to them to know what their issues are. So it starts with active listening. And then it also goes to telling the truth as it is. You don't need to sensationalize stories. So tell the truth as it is, and then allow these people have their voice. So agency is the next one. These people are not just victims. They have strengths, they have choices, they have voices. So advocacy is when you allow them to speak, when you allow them to own the story, when you don't just make them victims, but you you marry the struggles with the resilience or the strengths these people have. And then finally, you ask for consent or permission, get them involved. It is their story. You are just the voice or the medium that makes the stories travel. So for me, that's how you balance.
Very interesting. Well said. And tell me, what role does vulnerability play in creating an emotionally powerful narrative?
Fantastic question. For me, I would say vulnerability is what makes you powerful because it helps people see that you are human. We live in an era where AI makes everything look polished, everything perfect. But what people really want is the human side. So when you're vulnerable, you tell your audience that you've also been there. You have fears, you have embarrassment, the full range of emotions. So your audience feel, okay, this person has been there. She understands my journey. And they would want to listen to you. They would want to trust you. But there's a caveat. Vulnerability doesn't mean, oversharing or sharing your secrets online or just basically dumping your trauma. It is finding the sweet spot between sharing what you've healed from and what people need to learn from, or sharing your mistakes that you've gone over, and that way people listen to you and they trust you. Yes.
And in a digital world flooded with content, how can impact storytellers stand out and maintain credibility?
Well, the digital world is actually noisy. And to cut through that noise, impact storytellers must be real. They must share from their lived experiences because everybody keeps saying the same thing and recycling the same content. But you see your stories, those things make you unique. Your lived experiences and the lens you tell them from is what will make you stand out. So because stories help you to be clear, to be real, and to be credible. And once you tell stories that people can relate to, then there's no other you. You are unique. You are you. And so that way you stand out.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yes.
One more question relating to social impact storytelling, then we'll move to personal branding. How can stories move beyond awareness to inspire tangible action or policy change?
I believe stories can move people from just knowing to doing because they create an emotional trigger. So when you see a real person going through a real challenge, it makes you want to do something. And as Brené Brown says, stories are just data with a soul. Data creates awareness, but stories are what moves people. Stories are what grabs someone's attention. And once someone's attention is captured, the next thing is to move that person to action. And the only way you do that is through emotional triggering. And that's why storytelling is important. Once you tell the story, the action becomes clear and people follow through.
Well
Policymakers see that and they go on with it.
Well said. Nora, let's now talk about personal branding. You help quiet professionals build voice-driven brands. Why do you think so many people struggle to articulate their value?
That's an interesting question because right now I'm working with a lot of introverts who are brilliant professionals. They can hold their own in any conversation, deep, meaningful conversation. But when it's time to articulate what they do, they completely bolt. And some even avoid platforms like LinkedIn. So as an introvert myself, I understand what runs through their thoughts. And speaking with them only confirms what I've always thought. So an introvert's mind typically says, what if this isn't good enough? What if someone has already said this? What if no one engages? What if I say it the wrong way? So these fears are what holds introverts back. The typical introvert is a perfectionist. We are deep thinkers and we like to put our best foot forward. So anything that falls short of that just makes it draining for us. And also find it. Introverts showing online is like getting into a room full of eyes and full of strangers. So it's draining. Socially, environments drain introverts out, and we don't naturally gravitate towards the spotlight. So all of that overthinking, perfectionism, and the fear of not being ready are things that hold people back from articulating their value.
Your 7-day personal branding challenge is very interesting. Tell me about this challenge and what are some of these outcomes you have seen of your 7-day personal branding challenge?
Okay. Yeah, the 7-day, that challenge when I first started it. When I started it, it was actually a way to help people show up on LinkedIn. I didn't start with the aim of the numbers. I just started, let me help the next person show up on LinkedIn because I know their fears. So every day for 7 days, we did a task that moved us closer to building a personal brand.
Mm.
But I tell you, by the third day, people who had never posted on LinkedIn were sharing their first stories. There's a particular story that I pinned on my LinkedIn featured section. It was of a man who had long been putting away making a podcast in his native language, Urdu. He had always wanted to do that, but by the third day,
Mm.
he was already making steps. And by the time we're done, he had started that podcast. And so it showed me, that challenge just showed me that I was working with extremely talented individuals who
Mm.
were just not ready to put themselves out there because they didn't have the support, they didn't have the clarity. And that's the beautiful outcome that came from that challenge.
Mm.
People moved, took their next steps. It moved the needle for people. So for me, that was a very humbling moment.
Very interesting. What mindset shifts are essential before someone begins building their personal brand?
Interesting. First of all, I would say you should not see personal branding as self-promotion because that's the mistake a number of people make.
Hmm.
It is not self-promotion. It is simply putting your work out there and sharing the value you bring so that you inspire someone or
Hmm.
solve a problem for someone.
Hmm.
So it's important to note that difference. And then secondly, you have to accept that your voice is needed out there. Even if others have said the same things you're about to say,
Mhm.
no one says it quite the same way you say it. You are you. So your lived experiences, the lens you are going to say it from deserves to be said. And by saying it, you could inspire someone to take their next steps. You could solve a problem for someone. So
Hmm.
that shift is very important. And then thirdly, I'd say give yourself permission to learn
Hmm.
publicly
Hmm.
because introverts, we think we have to get everything down to a T. But the truth is, personal branding is built in real time. You get confident by actually doing the work and then showing up every day. That's how you
Hmm.
build confidence. So,
Hmm.
yes, just give yourself permission to learn publicly, and
Hmm.
then you get better as you show up.
Hmm. Amazing. Though I have time for two more questions. What role has
Okay.
LinkedIn played in your own growth to over 100,000 followers? And what lessons can others learn from your approach?
Hmm. I love that question. You see, when I started out on LinkedIn, like I said, I was just sharing my stories, my lived experiences, the lessons I was learning. I didn't start out because I wanted a community. I just
Mhm.
wanted to express myself. So it was an outlet for self expression for me. But when people started paying attention, it got me thinking that, okay, this is a message people really need to hear.
Hmm.
So what made the difference for me was I kept showing up, I was consistent, and I was clear about how I wanted to be seen. I was clear about my line of work. I
Hmm.
wasn't trying to be viral. I was just trying to be honest. And that over time built trust. And that's how I grew my audience to
Hmm.
100K followers and helped me sell my digital product, my flagship digital product, which is the 7-day personal branding challenge
Hmm.
that you spoke about.
Amazing. And my last question for you, as you look ahead, how do you see personal branding evolving in the next few years, especially for mission driven professionals?
Mm. Well, I would say personal branding is going to be the number one thing in this era of AI. People are exhausted by perfection, or they don't want people who are polished. They want people who are real, who are human.
Hmm.
They want clarity. People want to feel something.
Hmm.
And so your personal brand is what will put you out there. And for mission driven professionals, it's very important to have a personal brand because if you can articulate your value and your purpose clearly and show people your process, talk about your lived experiences, that is how you are going to get results. That is how you're going to build community. That's how you're going to inspire action
Hmm.
and get people to want to collaborate with you. So, yes, I believe People's voices will matter more than the aesthetics. People will keep inspiring other people. AI will keep getting better, but your lived experiences are what is going to give you the edge over every other person. And then finally, I would say community will play a huge role. People will trust brands less, but they will trust individuals more. So it is the professionals who build genuine relationships and share meaningful stories that are going to stand out.
Yeah. Amazing. And on that note, Nora, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. Thank you for talking to me about your own amazing journey. I love the way you explained how your dad called you with that story from the Bible. Thank you for talking to me about social impact storytelling and giving us some very interesting pointers for personal branding. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you for having me, Ashutosh. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.